which is a production of the Ink Kitchen, which is a media company with free information about garments and decoration. And we're sponsored by the show here, Impressions, who sets aside this space for a whole list of speakers today and tomorrow. We're sponsored by Hanes and Hirsch as well. And today we have Melissa Clark from US Blanks, and she's going to talk about custom garments, some things to think about, some pitfalls, probably a bunch of reasons why you should not do it. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, custom apparel is a world that a lot of people go down for reasons that aren't necessary. In this room alone, it feels like 1 million apparel manufacturers, all with
I think it's 2 million.
T-shirt. 2 million, probably, that all have the tweak that you're probably looking for. We have people come to me and they'll say, Melissa, I want to make a custom T-shirt. And I'll say, well, why? What is it about a specific T-shirt that you're looking for that's not already on the market? And the way I can easily translate this to the screen printing market is saying, when your customer comes in and they're like, I've got a killer idea for a brand, right? This thing's gonna blow up 1 million units, right? And then it turns out to be 12 units. The same thing goes with custom cut and sew. It's an arduous process. It is costly. My recommendation when I have a client that comes to me, I say, all right, if you're gonna do this, let's go through the checklist. First, why do you need a custom garment? Is it because of fit? Is it color? Is it fabric? What is your aim? And who are you selling the garment to? Who's gonna buy it? Why are they gonna buy it? What's gonna make your product unique? And there's really other ways that you can achieve that without doing a custom cut and sew with a hem label or a clip label, interior patch labels to tell your story in that way. But if you do want to go through the process, your first question is defining your market. Who are you going to be selling this to, and why are they going to buy it? How are you going to make your product so different and so special that they're going to have it?
And how often is it like when we're printing and they actually have not thought of these things?
99% of the time. The other piece that they never think about is how they're going to sell it. You can't just set up a website and expect people to magically show up and buy your T-shirt. But if you do get to the point where this is something that you need for a specific fit reason, you're going to save a lot of time, money, and headaches if you go to whoever you're going to be working with for cut and sew with a very specific idea in mind. If you come to me and say, I want to knock off this T-shirt, you need to know how much you want to spend on that shirt, how much you want it to cost, which is the one thing most people never think about. I say, what's your target price point? Oh, whatever, I just want this shirt. And I'll come back and it'll be $15. Like, whoa, I was thinking $4. So, and then you have to go back and walk through the process of what is it about this shirt or this garment that is so special that you have to have that makes it your shirt.
Is it also like the way when we have printing people that want to start a brand that they don't really know what they're getting into money-wise, like inventory, et cetera?
Yeah.
Because when we're doing printing, a lot of times, even if they do know how many shirts they might have to do initially, they don't realize that when they've sold half of them, they'll be out of some size and have to do another. So it's like 1.5 at least times the inventory that they imagine.
Yeah. Just to get through a custom cut and sew development, this is before your first product order, I would anticipate, or I would budget close to $10,000 to go through the full process correctly. And it's gonna be about 6 months of time. I've done it in 3 weeks, but that was super targeted and specific with what we were working with. But most clients that we come in with, it is a very slow, painful process, and it costs a lot of money. And then Once that initial investment is done, you've created your spec and your body and your collection. Then you move into production, and then that's when the real money starts to flow out. You're going to have to kind of forecast, which is an art, and there's no one that's perfect at it. And then you have to kind of plan and know financially when you're going to be able to place that second order, and you're going to have to work with the mill to figure out what their lead times are going to be to make sure that financially you are both set in both places and can keep in stock. Because ask any mill rep here, what's the most painful thing to tell your customer? We don't have inventory.
So how successful are you at talking people into buying an existing garment?
Not as successful as I would like to be. No, I've been able to guide. We have an extensive garment dye program, and I work with close to 70 different fabrics. So I'm able to kind of say, you know, this is really based off of the market that you're telling me you're going after. This is really the direction you want to go. You can save a lot of time and money and inventory, because what if it doesn't sell? So
Actually, now, when people want to start a brand, and I don't take their money right away. I usually, if I can tell that they're not really knowing what they do, I charge them like a consulting fee and then try to talk them out of it. Because I used to feel bad. People would invest sometimes their grandmother's money in $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, and they haven't even thought out how they're going to sell the shirts.
right, and people often over design and overthink it. At the end of the day, it's still a t-shirt, and if it's going to be graphic oriented, making sure you have that right platform for your brand is so important, and there's a million different versions out there already.
All right, so say somebody that you think should be doing this because they have a very specific fit perhaps, or some kind of style element that's not normal. How long does the whole process take, and what kind of things do they need to be thinking about first, and what part do they have to do, and what part do you have to do in working out the patterns and all that?
I'm going to speak from my company's perspective because that's what I know. I know other companies
okay.
work in different ways. So pattern development is probably the fastest. It can either be the slowest or the fastest part, depending on how complicated and how nuanced you want to get. But making sure, because the number one thing to talk about with your mill is having all the same points of measurement, and understanding where, if your company says high point shoulder, where that exactly is. Is it an inch? Where is it on the rib, or is it off the rib?
Right.
Those kinds of things. So, but that's the fastest part of the process. The whole process, soup to nuts, is probably 6 months on the slow side, and that's being very meticulous. But you can speed that up by having all the answers, like this is the shirt, this is the fabric, these are the details, this is the label, this is where we want the label placement in. You can probably reduce it down to 4 to 6 weeks at that point, and you would have inventory a couple weeks following.
Should we have some questions, maybe? Any questions about making custom garments?
So, talk about it.
So the question is, what is a typical budget for a cut and sew project?
First-timers budget.
Budget.
That's a great question. So my first question is, do you have a tech pack? What am I working off of? Nothing, or? Yep.
All right, so the question is, if I have a garment that has measurements that don't work, that would be the starting point.
Okay.
So that the question is, if they have garments to show, like they like some aspect of one and some aspects of another, that would be the starting point, not a tech point.
So not cheap at all, but so your first step is going to be your pattern fee, which is going to range anywhere from $125 to $350, depending on the complexity of the pattern. This is a giant asterisk point that gets a lot of people in nuance. Anytime you make any adjustment to that pattern, you will be recharged that fee. So if you make, if it's outside of grade, and a good rep will tell you at this point, we've now started the process over. And then
Is that for a range of sizes, or is that per size?
that's going to be your base size, and then you can do your grading after that. So, and grading refers to, doing 1 inch per size or 1.5 inches. But if you came to me and you're like, this is the fit that I want, and we make that sample, and then you're like, no, I got to adjust the bias by this much. The pattern that we've originally made and done all the work for is essentially useless. So that's the reason that you have to go through and make that fee again. Then your actual physical sample, if you're doing one, it's going to be right around $75 to $125 for the sample, depending on the fit, the fabric, and all of that. When you get into SMS or salesman samples, those are going to run you, depending on the complexity, I would budget $75 to $125 for those as well. So you can already start adding up those numbers, right? If you need 12 SMS samples and you need a full size run, 12 of each, and they're $125 a piece, that starts to add up very quickly. And then you're going to do a 50% deposit typically for when you get it ready to roll into production.
X amount.
So the question is there a quantity at which it starts to make sense?
I'm going to answer that in 2 ways. So if you're doing a PFD program, which is a prepared for dye, and you're going to do different dyes, because that's really your most cost-effective way to build out a brand is with a PFD and a garment dye solution. 600 pieces is about where you need to be. So, but if you're going to do in piece dye, which is your standard T-shirt, then you're going to want to be at the 1,500 mark, because every mill, I don't want to sit on fabric. I don't want to sit on T-shirts, and I don't want to sit on fabric that's not mine. So we're going to require that you use all of that fabric, so it's going to be dependent on the yield, if that makes sense.
So if it was a fabric that you could commonly acquire, and say it was not super complicated to sew, say it was just some special V-neck or something like that, for 1,500 shirts, roughly what would somebody be paying?
I'm not that dumb. I'm not quoting. Because
just a range for somebody to know.
But then you get into, where's your label going? What is the label? Your binding, are you doing binding? Are you doing self neck? So it can be anywhere from, I do all USA made production, so it's about $5 all the way. I have shirts that I've sold for $30, T-shirts.
Okay. No, I think it's helpful to know that. So it's from maybe $4 or $5 up to $30. Okay.
Yeah, and it really, because it depends on your base fabric. So if you're doing a 30 single combed ring spun jersey, that's going to be your least expensive. But then it becomes on your yield, your fit, and all of the other details. T-shirts are actually more complicated than even I would like to admit.
Right. Other questions? You can keep asking, brother.
If you don't have, like you referenced the tech pack or whatever, how do you go about creating that? Or is it, if you're working with somebody, but how do you even begin on that if you don't want to go the route of, I like this sleeve and this?
So the question is, how do you go about making a tech pack for your project?
So any mill worth its weight, if you came to them, even if it's off of a screenshot off the right target, you're like, I just love this T-shirt, I want to make this T-shirt. They can make you a tech pack because they're making your pattern. They will make your final tech pack for you. But then it can become a proprietary thing because we've created it, so you want to make sure that you negotiate that that you own that tech pack and that pattern. And that's an additional fee. If you want to buy that, that's going to cost you significantly more.
Is it, from a financing perspective, you said the 50% down, and then typically to get your shipment released from wherever it's manufactured, what is the standard to expect?
So what are the standard terms? 50% deposit, when do you have to pay the rest?
It kind of, for us, if you can get approved by CIT, we'll take it net 30. We don't offer any in-house, so that's usually
CIT
how it
is
works.
a factor.
So it's like a bank.
If any of you are not familiar with factoring, factoring is basically the financing institution owns the receivable, so that in this case, U.S. Blanks would get a percentage, which would be most of the money up front, and you would pay the factor on the terms. It's more complicated than that, but that's the basis of factoring.
You're not going to see many mills be aggressive in wanting to work with you in terms of financing on your first run. It's going to take where we start to see that it becomes a real business. There's a lot of risk involved for us, because once we've made a garment with somebody else's name on it, I can't sell that. So if it's rejected and something happens, I'm out a lot of money.
So the question is, do you have to pay in full before it's released?
Yeah, you would have to, once the order's ready, you would have to pay.
Other questions? How do you, what's the rough estimate for the tech pack and all the information to get a project going?
I would budget $1,000 to $5,000 depending on the complexity and the number of garments.
So the question is, to get the one project going, is it $1,000 to $5,000?
$1,000 to $5,000 would be to get the project going. And the reason I say that big of a range is because if you don't like the fit on the first one, got to do it again. Got to do it again until it's ready to go into production. Usually, if all of the right steps are followed, you can hit it in the first one and you're done. So you could be done for $500, but budget for screw-ups and to recalculate your thinking.
Yeah, I used to run a cut and sew, actually, and I would say that's pretty fair. That most times you can get what people want, but things can sometimes drag on and on and on, especially if you get some kind of like technical fabrics or those kind of things where the fit is hard to imagine ahead of time.
Oh, this is my number one thing. A mill is going to quote you a time that's going to take. Budget 4 weeks after that, because stuff happens in our world. So a mill will tell you it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks. I would pad that for you, just to give yourself some breathing room, and they should give you some whips and everything as you get into inventory. Typically, it should take 2 to 3 weeks at most to roll out a sample from initial conversations, but that would leave a lot of breathing time. So if you have an event or something that you're trying to hit, be very clear about that this is for this event and for this only. Does that make sense? So give yourself some breathing room so you're not freaking out at the last minute of like, where's my stuff? Because I get that call probably more often than I would like to.
Let me ask you this. We're done with that process. We got something that we like, we want to go in production. Is the cost of a tee going to be competitive to what's, let's just say like an American Apparel, which you would pay?
So the question is, would a custom garment that's relatively simple be comparable price when you do it on a custom basis to another American-made T-shirt that's readily available?
No. And here's why. Volume. There's no efficiency in running what American Apparel and Gildan are able to. I mean, they're running millions of units, right? And so they're super efficient in that process. What we're doing on small, I work in 600-piece runs. So 600 pieces of this, okay. Then you have to change everything about your equipment, the thread. All of it has to change for the next project. So there's all of those things in the cutting and the sewing. And so it's just not as efficient. But back to my first point, if you go in and say, I want to hit this price point, make that very clear where you want to be. And then I can build a shirt to that. I can tell you how to get there versus I just want this shirt. Great, it's $40, right? And then you're like, well, crap. But if you tell me up front, I want to be in the $4.50, $6 range, cool, this is how we're going to get there.
So the questions would be similar, like what kind of fabric, the yield from the yardage that fabric is available,
Yep.
and those kind of things are always going to affect the price, correct?
Yes, yep.
And how you exactly sew things, right? Certain things are easier to sew with particular sewing machines and others aren't, right?
Yeah, like for domestic production, certain stitches is not, certain types of sewing are not available in the United States at all, which is why you don't see certain kinds of apparel done domestically because it's just not done here. And also, like single needle sewing is very slow and arduous and is not done in mass in LA specifically. So it's harder to find and more expensive. So little details about doing a double needle versus a single needle can change a price by $1.50.
So, very good points. The other costs to consider are the cost to warehouse it, the cost of financing it, and the cost of fulfillment. Did I get them all?
Why you lost money on the deal?
And freight.
So the comment.
So it's just cheap to ship.
So the comment was that you often don't think of these costs, and they can really add up to a lot, like a significant percentage of what your cost of it is.
Which again is why a off-the-shelf blank is easier for everybody. The other issue with doing custom apparel, once that leaves my building, that's your product, right? So if there's a spec issue or anything like that, guess you own 100% of that. So you don't have that additional, if something happens that it's not inherently in the manufacturing process, that's all on you.
So the main way to avoid doing custom is what? Relabeling and garment dye? Are those like the ways to get what you want a lot of times?
Yeah, relabel, garment dye. I can tell you a million brands you probably have never even thought are just an off-the-shelf blank, and are just relabeled and really putting the detailed touches and spending the money and doing a patch label or a clip label, or doing what you guys do best is killer art.
Actually, I mean, for example, I've done stuff for people. It's like a really cheap sweatshirt, and you put like a really nice applique on it, and it looks expensive.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with decoration.
This hoodie I'm wearing,
I think you mentioned earlier, label placement even.
Yeah.
If you have a kind of a clever way to use labels on it, can make it look like it's really your garment.
Yep. This hoodie that I'm wearing is a spec actually brought to us from one of our customers, but we've brought it in our wholesale collection. They retail it for over $350. Insane. It's a $25 hoodie. So we're making the wrong margin. I understand that, but those kinds of things.
It just adds up really fast.
So this woman with probably many bruises on her points out that the shipping, both from overseas and overland once it gets here, is another consideration as well. All right. Melissa is going to stick around for a few minutes, and she also has a booth if you want to talk to her. She's very approachable, at least as far as I've seen. So how about a hand from Melissa?
Thanks, you guys.